You know, if there's one thing I enjoy more than drinking until I lose control of my lower body, it's boobs. No, it's the Resident Evil series. There's just something endlessly enjoyable about mooching around ruined cities and dilapidated buildings, desperately looking for a way out while fending off the shambling, decomposing monstrosities that inhabit the place. It's like that night out I had in Greenock once, except the women are more attractive. I mean, you still would, wouldn't you? The original Resident Evil was a masterclass in slow-paced, atmospheric survival horror that set the template for what was to come. Resi 2 added a layer of action and complexity while retaining the core concepts of exploration, inventory management, and problem solving, delivering a more polished and confident gaming experience. Then along came Resident Evil 3, which basically said, fuck it, and went for all-out, balls-to-the-wall action, which was a pretty bold move for a series based around static pre-rendered backgrounds and tank controls. It certainly had a good stab at this noble goal, but there was no getting around the fact that the game was basically a second-tier side project hastily bumped up to main event status. Some of the action scenes strained the limits of the PS1's hardware, and it was pretty obvious where the dev team were forced to cut corners to make their deadline. But overall, Resi 3 proved to be a fun, undemanding, if slightly forgettable adventure, rounding out the PS1 trilogy in mostly satisfying fashion. But it always felt like a game that could have been more than it was, and with the success of the Resi 2 remake came the news that Capcom were giving Part 3 a similar treatment. This was great, I thought. With all the time, budget and graphical resources they'd lacked the last time around, Capcom finally had a chance to put it all right and deliver the perfect Resident Evil gaming experience we'd all been waiting for. Such was my foolish dream. What we actually have is a glorified expansion pack for Resident Evil 2, packaged and priced like a full game that doesn't just fail to correct the issues that hampered the original, it actually finds a way to make them worse. The end result is a shallow, lazy, frustratingly short rehash that removes a lot of badly needed content and replaces it with nothing of value. Allow me to illuminate you as we journey once more into the world of Resident Evil. You play as Jill Valentine, a survivor of the Elite Stars unit from the original game. It's been a few months since the mansion incident, and Jill's been busy trying to expose the misdeeds of the Umbrella Corporation, the sinister, faceless company behind the whole thing. Unfortunately, a viral outbreak plunges Raccoon City into chaos, and just as Jill's getting her head around it all, this fucking arsehole bursts into her apartment. And he didn't even obtain affirmative consent. Jesus, this game really doesn't fuck around. 2 minutes in and you've already run into the primary antagonist and had your place trashed worse than that time I did shots of hydraulic fluid. Anyway, after a very scripted chase sequence that might as well have been a cutscene for how much you're able to influence it, you're plonked into the game proper and let loose in Raccoon City. It's pretty much your standard Resident Evil setup. You're trapped in a bad place with lots of things that want to eat you, and it's your job to find a way out. You do this by exploring the environment, solving puzzles and picking up key items to unlock new areas, while managing a limited stock of weapons and resources to fend off enemies and stay alive. Pretty soon you'll run into a shady mercenary outfit that's been sent in to pacify the situation, only to find themselves cut off and outnumbered. It seems like they have other plans, but you're forced to work with them to find a means of escape. Complicating things is the Nemesis, a virtually unstoppable enemy bent on killing Jill, who possesses the unique ability to show up whenever it's convenient to the plot. I could break down the full storyline here, but honestly, there isn't all that much to say. The mercs have found a way to escape, but naturally you need to venture out and gather a bunch of things to make it work. So you find the things, but then it all goes wrong and Jill gets hurt, so you have to take over as Carlos for a while and do a bunch of busy work to help her. And oh no, someone in the team who's been acting shady turns out to be the world's most obvious traitor. Then it all culminates in a climactic fight with a countdown and a helicopter escape from a big explosion. So far, so Resident Evil. So why am I being such a miserable asshole about it? Well, we might as well get the most obvious gripe out of the way first. I'd heard disturbing rumours that this game was short even before I played it, so on my first attempt, I did everything I could to spin out the experience as much as possible. I thoroughly explored every room and area, read every note, found every weapon and hidden item I can get my hands on, and it took me a grand total of 5 hours to complete. For comparison, I took the opposite approach for my second attempt and managed to finish in just under 3 hours, and I'm not even that good at it. Considering the price of this game could have bought me a couple of private dances with Tatiana, that is not a good investment of my hard-earned cash. Now, I'm not necessarily against shorter, more concise campaigns, provided they offer up a rich, immersive, challenging, and ultimately satisfying gaming experience, preferably one that encourages repeated playthroughs. Unfortunately, Resi 3 offers none of these things. For a start, the difficulty curve is completely non-existent, whereas the Resi 2 remake gave you just enough firepower to get by, forcing you to play conservatively and pick your battles wisely. Nemesis practically throws weapon, ammo and health at you. Never once did I even come close to running out. Now, this would seem to make sense given the game's increased focus on combat, but there isn't a corresponding increase in enemy numbers or difficulty, meaning that most of the time you're all geared up with nothing to shoot at. I kept thinking the game was trying to lull me into some false sense of security by going easy on me at first, only to hit me with an avalanche of combat later on, but it never really happens. You're not exactly drowning in variety either. Once or twice you'll encounter dogs, or a licker, or even a few hunters, but it's all standard Resident Evil stuff that you've seen a million times before. It's like the dev team put them in because they had the assets available from the last game, so why not use them, right? Unique enemies are few and far between this time around. There's some mutated tick things in one section that can fuck you up with poison and force you to go through a tedious throwing up animation that locks you in place, basically guaranteeing you'll be hit a second time. There's also... What the fuck is this? But for the most part, you'll be dealing with plain old zombies, which are more like slow-moving obstacles than real threats. The only time you have to worry about them is in narrow corridors, but when they're mooching around wide open spaces like in this game, you can just breeze past without a care in the world. And once you get your hands on the shotgun with its plentiful ammo, all your problems turn into distant memories. I mean, I guess Nemesis himself is meant to be the biggest ammo drain. He'll show up at various scripted points to mess with you, and you've got the choice to fight him and temporarily disable him, or just run away and carry on with your mission. I know which one I chose. The original game would throw in Nemesis encounters at random points, and it became genuinely tense, because you never quite knew when he'd show up or how much damage he'd do. Like, you'd be going about your business, entering a room without a care in the world, and this big arsehole would just be fucking standing there waiting for you. It taught you to always be on guard, and it forced you to carry extra weapons that clogged up your inventory and made progression slower. Now he's more of a passing inconvenience than a real danger. He won't go inside confined buildings or save rooms, and as long as you've got a few health items on hand, you can pretty much brute force your way through his attacks to get away. Mr. X from the Resi 2 remake showed us how this kind of thing could and should be done. He felt like a persistent, genuine threat that was constantly stalking you. At any moment, you might hear the heavy thump of his footsteps and the sound of doors opening somewhere in the building, and you knew it was only a matter of time until he found you. Nemesis, on the other hand, will show up for a quick scripted sequence, then fucks off again. It feels mechanical and intrusive, and it breaks the immersion. And as for the final battle, it's about as tense and nerve-wracking as the finale of Captain Marvel. The original game was pretty challenging because not only did you have to fend off his attacks, but you also had to lure him into just the right position at just the right time to take him down. You had to balance lots of different things simultaneously, with a ticking clock added to the mix, and if his pathfinding didn't feel like cooperating with you, guess what? You were fucked. Now it's just a case of shoot the very obvious vulnerable bits to stun him for a while, then push some things into the wall, then blow him up with an oversized railgun that a 50-kilo woman can somehow handle like it's a fucking garden strimmer. How is any human being even supposed to lift this thing? Never mind fire it. Graphically, the game is decent enough, I guess. It uses the Resi 7 engine, and although it's not quite as impressive as it was 3 years ago, it gets the job done. There's some nice incidental detail, and the game assets are well put together, because most of them came from Resi 2, but they're does seem to be a kind of weird, murky filter placed over everything, probably to hide the limited texture detail at longer distances. Environments and level design are more efficient, but also more restricted than before. One of my gripes with the original game was that the early levels felt sprawling and linear instead of a complex, interconnected environment. There were lots of long, tedious alleyways to run down, and not much to investigate along the way. Unlike the mansion and the police station, there was no natural focal point to orient yourself, so world traversal quickly became time-consuming and boring. Here, the city maps have been massively condensed down, so that everything's tighter and closer together, but there's also fewer objectives and hidden areas to seek out, so there's less incentive to actually explore the place. Also, the game literally highlights collectible items within range and plops them onto your map, so you don't even have to look around or think anymore. Jesus, the game practically completes itself for you. Stop holding my fucking hand, I don't want your help. Resident Evil games are supposed to be about figuring out your next objective for yourself. They're supposed to reward careful and methodical exploration. Now it just straight up tells you where you need to go and what you need to do at all times. It's like taking a jeep across the Sahara Desert, except you've got your naggy gran in the back seat trying to navigate for you. And it's not like the puzzles are going to eat up much of your time. Resi 3 wasn't exactly known for its mind-bending problems, but there was at least a few decent puzzles that demanded some backtracking and lateral thinking. Now the most complex task you'll face boils down to find a thing, combine it with another thing, and use it in a machine thing. Yeah, you're not exactly stretching our mental capacities to their limits here, Capcom. As I mentioned before, the plot is basically just a way of stringing together a series of arbitrary objectives for the player. There's no real sense of intrigue or mystery, or the feeling like you're caught up in a larger conspiracy. Just go to the place and do the thing you're told to do. What's more frustrating is that there's a whole bunch of potentially interesting subplots that are hinted at, but never get resolved, and I can't shake the feeling that a lot of this stuff was cut due to time constraints. Like the possibility of Jill being infected by a slow-acting version of the T-virus from the first game that never gets mentioned after the intro sequence, or the gun shop owner implied to be hiding a dark secret that you never learn about, or the brief glimpse of a character from Resi 2 that you never get to interact with again, or the antagonist who betrays the team and offers to spill the beans on who hired him only to get left behind at the climax. It just feels disappointing. Like, I guess it's teasing his return in future adventures, but fuck knows why. He's only in a handful of scenes, and he's hardly a charismatic antagonist that I want to learn more about. Speaking of characters, Jill's gone through a bit of a makeover since the original game, and I'm not just talking about her wardrobe. Although I do love how the old vest and jeans combo seems to be the go-to outfit for every generically tough woman in a video game these days. Jill's a bit more abrasive and confrontational this time around, which I guess makes sense considering everything she's been through up to this point, but it does make it tough to empathise with her when she doesn't act fazed by anything going on. At least Carlos has got some personality, and I like the character arc he goes through as he starts to question his mission and the motivations of his employers. And thank Christ they've updated his dialogue.
Look, we're just mercenaries, hired hands. Do you really think the master would tell his dogs why they have to retrieve the stick he just threw?
He and Jill actually have some decent banter, and it's refreshing to see a male character that gives as good as he gets for once, instead of folding like a wet rag the second a woman tries to put him down. These exchanges are fun and show good chemistry, but like everything else in this game, there's just not enough of them. I wanted to see Jill and Carlos spend some time together, tackle an objective or two, share a few bits of personal information, maybe even bond a little. You actually get to take command of Carlos while Jill's out of action, just like the original game, although for some reason, the section in the police station is now given over to him as well, but instead of adding to his character, it kind of detracts from hers. I want to see how Jill reacts to being in her old office again, reminiscing about the teammates she's lost. I can understand the desire to bulk up his screen time, but why not add something new and unique to the game instead of taking something away from Jill? There's also a ridiculous siege battle in the hospital that feels totally at odds with Resident Evil and is basically just a cheap way of having a big action set piece. The original Resi 3 was able to offset its short length and single campaign with a branching storyline, where player choices could alter events, character interactions, and spawn multiple endings. It wasn't as subtle or or as cleverly implemented as Resi 1, and it never really made sense to me how and why certain player decisions affected the flow of events, but whatever. The point is that it gave you a reason to replay the game, experimenting with different choices and approaches to get different results. But now all you get is one linear story that plays from start to finish, and not a particularly big one at that. In fact, a lot of the clever little features that originally helped to elevate a pretty pedestrian game have been dropped quicker than an emotionally needy vegan ex-girlfriend. Randomized enemy encounters and item placement that meant you never had exactly the same experience twice? Never mind, forget it. Mercenaries mode? Why bother? It's not like anyone enjoyed that. The clock tower and park levels? Don't need them. Also, this might seem like a random gripe, but in a series that's meant to be all about body horror and terrifying mutations, you never really encounter anything that shocking or disgusting in this game. Yeah, the Nemesis gets progressively more fucked up as the story progresses, and there's a cool little dream sequence at the start that shows a rapidly zombifying jail in first person, but that's about it. Like so many other things, it feels like a totally wasted opportunity. The original Resi 3 was balanced right on the brink of being disappointing, and it relied on all these diverse elements working together in harmony to keep it from tipping over the edge. By removing them and offering nothing meaningful in their place, the remake ultimately delivers an experience that's shallow, lazy, and unimaginative. A short, simplistic, by-the-numbers story paired with stale and predictable combat, non-existent puzzles, uninspiring environments, and a complete lack of incentive to explore, experiment, and replay. It's a game that feels rushed and incomplete. A game that might have succeeded as a £20 expansion pack for Resi 2, but falls well short as a standalone title that somehow expects to compete with the big boys. It's a missed opportunity, and it's kind of ironic that the very same factors which held back the original from greatness have somehow come together again 20 years later. Oh well, considering how they're now talking about remaking Resi 4, I imagine we'll only need to wait another decade or so before the wheel grinds its way back around to Nemesis again. Anyway, that's all I've got for today. Go away now.